I play a lot of survival Minecraft, and what I tend to enjoy most is coming up with brand new designs, usually of an industrial or city theme. So today I'm going to be taking you inside my creative process on how I designed my favorite factory ever, all in vanilla Minecraft. This isn't going to be a step-by-step building tutorial, instead it's a behind-the-scenes look at how I approach building in the hopes that it sparks some ideas and inspiration for you. I'll also, as an added bonus, be providing a full world download that you can go and check out at the end of this video, so make sure you go and hit that like and subscribe button. When it comes to building a brand new design in Minecraft, I think one of the hardest parts can be actually getting started in the first place. Now, if you're anything like me, then it's just, I don't know what it is about it, but that getting started stage, it's the worst. It's something where you have an idea in your brain and you get all excited because you want to go and build all these fancy big things in your world, but then you hit the reality of, how do I actually get started? I'd say probably the best way about tackling this, at least, and this is what I do personally, is I'll try and look at inspiration out there, either via like pre-existing Minecraft builds from all the many talented builders out there in the community, or via looking at real-world builds, because, you know, sometimes real-world builds are even better than anything else because you get to actually see some real architecture and actually try and take some real concepts, like design choices or shapes and layouts and stuff like that, and just translate it into a build in Minecraft. And that's what I generally like to do. But for the design that I'm going to take you through today, I actually took my inspiration from my own build, which I actually made probably about a couple of years ago now, and there was a lot of positive reception around it that really blew me away. And so I really just wanted to revisit this and try and see if I could do something a bit better now. It's been a couple of years, as I said, since building this, and then take you through that process at the same time. So yeah, the first stage is just really getting yourself some inspiration. Then I think it comes on to sort of the more important decisions, like starting to think about what blocks you want to actually use. Now, some players like to do this stage a little bit later on. Perhaps some players like to actually build out a bit of a layout of a build, design like a rough draft, and then afterwards start to look at the block choices they want to look at using. But for me personally, I just quite like sort of getting some early grasps on some like build palettes and things that I want to use, because I can find that in itself quite interesting and inspiring for me, because it kind of gives me a bit of a feel about like the direction I want to take it in, and especially if you're deciding like what sort of style or theme and stuff like that. So yeah, it can be just really useful just to get this sort of drafted out, and it definitely is best to do this, I think, in a creative world, because you have obviously access to, well, the whole list of blocks and items in there, and it can be really useful just to kind of look through and just kind of see if there's any similar textures or like color variants and things that could go well together. And you can just kind of jot them out together in the world, just to kind of get a feel about what goes together. Just get some things laid out in the world to give yourself a bit of a feel. Now, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, then there are also plenty of ready-built sort of palettes that other players have come up with and shared them online. So you can always use those as inspiration as well. But for me then, once I've gone from this sort of stage, I then start to think about the shapes. Now, as I said before, I have actually taken quite a bit of inspiration from my original factory design. And for that, you'll see there's some similarities here with the general shape, if you like, where I'm taking this sort of indented design where I've kind of got the wall layout here, and then I've kind of gone in one so that I can kind of build out like a little, like I'm going to say all the wrong things, like roofing ledge, if you like, that can go along the edge, because adds a bit of detailing into the wall structure, and I think this breaks up the walls as a whole, because I think one of the things that I commonly run up against really in any kind of build is that the walls tend to be quite blank and they kind of don't really have much depth to them, and I think this can really kind of hinder the quality of the design overall. So by sort of adding different features like this, where we kind of inlet by one and add, as I said, like a little wall ledge, and I'll show you a bit more in detail further along, it can really make a lot of difference. So yeah, I think just getting together a rough layout and also work out roughly the sort of the height or the dimensions, should I say, of what you want to do, it is really helpful. And I've tried to sort of do a main sort of body area here, and then I've also I really like the idea of having like a little outlet building, if you like, that comes off of the back of it, because I think when I was looking at a lot of real world images, what you'll commonly see, particularly of factories, is that you'll have a lot of little like outbuildings and things that are attached to like the main core structure. So I've tried to sort of start doing this a little bit here with this design. So I'll admit, when I first sort of came up with this bit, I wasn't quite sure where I was going to be going with it, but I just figured just kind of build out a rough shape, and then I was going to like kind of figure out how I wanted to take it from there. But at this stage, you don't really need to worry about texturing. I mean, Obviously, if you're building this directly as Survivor and you're not doing any kind of creative world build testing first, then you might want to, I suppose, choose carefully the blocks you want to use, because you don't want to have to keep destroying and recreating. But if you're in a creative world, obviously it's super easy just to kind of change and, you know, replace blocks as you're going along. And I don't tend to use any kind of mods really typically. I mean, in creative, I do lose a little bit of world edit just for replacing blocks or moving things, but by no means you know you don't have to do anything along those lines. But I suppose when you're in creative, it's just really easy to just, you know, move things around, replace them as and how you like. But yeah, texture at this point is not important. It's just all about getting a shape. So this is all I tend to do, just kind of get a shape together. And I've intentionally highlighted by showing the roof on here as well, because I think it's really important that when you are starting to lay out like a core structure of a build, that you think about the roof. Because I think the biggest mistake I've made in the past is I've started to get together maybe like a rough structure, and then I've not thought enough about what the actual roof is going to be like and how it's actually going to fit. In more recent builds, I've really tried to do a bit more of this, because roofs tend to be my they always trying to get me in the end. I really struggle trying to visualize roofs in particular. I ever had them sort of too flat or too, I don't know, but I struggle with roofs quite a lot. So I think it's really useful if you can just kind of figure out the rough layout, the shape of the roof that you want to do, and make sure it fits with the core structure. And depending on how wide your builds are, you can kind of figure out how you want to do this, whether you just want to do it with stair blocks. But what I sometimes find is that stairs, they can be a bit jagged in like the transition, and they can be quite sharp, should I say, as they curve over. But what I find can actually work a little bit better if you want a bit more of, like, for example, an arch shape like I've gone for here, is that if you just use standard full blocks, and you can get a bit more of a defined arch in a more of a, like a, I suppose a not smaller space, but just I don't know, more efficient use of the space, and you can see it's more defined. Yeah, so that's kind of what I've done here, where I've laid it all out, got the rough shape, and then just added a very tiny bit of detailing by adding these bands just kind of connect over, and I made them so that they purposely lined up with the columns. You can really start to get a bit of a feel about where your build is going to be going, and I think for me personally, this is where my inspiration starts to really kick in. Like once I kind of get the feel for the sort of the general appearance, if you like, then it's a lot easier for me to push forward and actually kind of get into the more fun and detailing bits and everything like that. But yeah, the final bit that I kind of did at this sort of stage is just start to think a little bit about chimneys. Because at a factory build, we do want to have some sort of chimneys that are coming up out of the structure. I did contemplate whether I wanted to do a bit of like an outbuilding like I did on my original design, where I had the sort of like initial section there and then some slanted roofs and the chimneys coming out, and I do really like that, but I wanted to do something a little bit different. I mean, if you look at it, it's quite uniform, it's quite symmetrical, like they're all just kind of in a row together, there's no kind of variation, which is fine. But I think in a lot of real world builds, you will see some of that, sure, but I think a lot of the time you'll see a lot more ununiformity. Like you'll have, is that a word? Oh gosh, I'm making up words now. But you'll find that things maybe are a little bit more all over the place, a bit more organic. So that's kind of what I've tried to do here as well. As I say, I've not done any texturing. I've just loosely laid out like 3 chimneys coming off of different areas of the roof. And I've tried to make it so that they look like they can all fit together, but they're just slightly offset. I think they're the exact same size, but just, yeah, offset a little bit. And I've also tried to break up the columns of the chimneys a little bit, maybe to add in more of like an aged look. To be honest, I wasn't really sure where I was going with it, but I just figured that having something a little bit more broken up than just a flat sort of square, but no, just kind of like that structure going up, he kind of wants to break it up a little bit and just add in a bit more detail and stuff. So I think if you break it up and like this, then it can add a bit more character, and I think that really goes a long way. Yeah, so once I've kind of got this sort of stage done where I've got the rough layout, then it makes it a lot easier for me to kind of go through into the next stage. And this is where a lot of the fun starts. This is where we start to look at a bit more of the sort of the block choices, or maybe around the walls. Now, for this, I purposely left this untextured. I've just literally filled them in, just to kind of give an idea that I tend to then gauge like color palette differences. So, whereas I wanted to keep like the bands, like the column structures, more of those sort of terracotta and brick, like orangey colors. But I wanted the core walls to actually be more of the mudsed colors, because I think that adds just a nice bit of variation, and it will certainly add a bit more texture when we actually get to that a little bit later on. But I just like to generally fill out when I'm getting an early feel of things, just to kind of see if it does actually look okay and if it's something that could work. And it's also a good opportunity then to start thinking about things like if you want to add in any sort of windows to kind of break up your walls as well. And something that I absolutely love for windows is the use of bamboo in the scaffolding blocks. I don't think I've ever actually used them for actual scaffolding. I've only really ever used them for building details. I don't know, maybe I'm calling me an old school, but I've always just used mud blocks for dirt blocks for scaffolding, and never actually bothered with the actual bamboo scaffolding when they added that into the game. But you know, I just think they're much better for a window anyway. They're just, I mean, you don't really have anything like this otherwise for like the sort of the more broken up like appearance like that. So I think they look really well, especially in a sort of more classic older industrial builds. I think that always goes a long way. So then once I kind of filled out the walls, then I start to think a little bit more around, I suppose, detailing and kind of getting a feel for things. So this is when I tend to start thinking about like a bit more around like what the roof sort of structure is going to be. So as I said, that little outlet building that I was going to be adding in, sort of the little offset section of the main structure. I didn't want it to follow the same arching roof because obviously I want it to be very separate, and I want to feel like it's actually being kind of built on as like a bit of an extension onto the original build. So I've kind of decided, like at least in these sort of design phases, this is kind of where I decide on where I want to go with it. And I was thinking in this, at least with this, that I was going to use just the same sort of the tough blocks for a bit of the roof, but just kind of build like a borderline edge around this. And then I intentionally decided that I'd keep the actual main area here quite flat, and you'll see why in a bit, because sometimes I think it's really useful. I mean, sometimes you can have the nice arches and have everything detailed in that way, and this is honestly, I think I really like this sort of thing in any kind of build. But sometimes for a bit of contrast, sometimes flat structures can also go just as far, because you can make use of the space, you can add little extra details on. And normally I don't necessarily know exactly where I'm going with it, but sometimes I figure just having like an open space like this, it can be really useful, because then we can start adding in different things like maybe like a water tower, or I don't know, I mean, I make like aircon units or some sort of outlet thing for air vents, or many different things really that you could sort of add in as other little details onto an otherwise flat surface, and that can also have a really big impact, and I think in builds. And in the case of this factory design, I decided, yes, I absolutely did want a section with flat roof that I could kind of play around with and see where I could take it. And this is where I've thought about adding in like something to contrast and break it up. And I find generally I quite like using the like stripped logs of some sort. I always find that this goes quite a long way into providing that, as certainly as well it fits in really well with industrial builds. So this is where one of my go-to things, I think, when I'm adding in roofs, is that if I want to add a bit of a terminating point, like something to contrast or break up two different sections between roofs, then I'll add in a bit of things here with the like the stripped wood, and you can soften it off a bit with the like sort of like some stair blocks as well, if you so do choose. And I also find it's quite useful then, because you can kind of then, as you'll see inside here, I've started to think about using the same sort of stripped logs, then adding in like archway structures inside the build. So then it really connects together, and it connects the exterior with the interior a little bit better. And I think that just goes a long way. So yeah, that's generally what I like to do. But then we really get on to more of the fun stages, and this is when we can start to really have fun with texturing. So obviously you saw those color palettes that I was showing you earlier. And that's kind of what you can use as your inspiration for texturing and sort of breaking up that sort of flat, sort of monotone like palette into something that's much more fun and detailed. Now, I will admit, it's not necessarily my strongest point. Like, I've really been watching a lot of P-Tubs, trying to understand a bit more about like what goes into his thought process around building and trying to add in like shadow and depth into things. And I'll admit, I'm not all the way there. I've got a long way to go with this. But I am trying to experiment a little bit more. So when I get to this sort of stage in the building process, I tend to try and think a little bit around what makes sense and what doesn't. And what I've tried to do here is, because I've added this little outlet bit here with the roof section over here, I've tried to make it look a bit more like dark and almost like shadowed. So I've kind of got obviously all the mud wall, packed mud wall with the bricks and the sort of the standard packed mud, and even some brown mushrooms and stuff. But then I've tried to then transition a little bit into some rooted dirt, even some spruce planks, and then some coarse dirt, just to kind of make it a little bit shadowed. You know, I've never really thought much in the past around using dirt blocks in any kind of design, but do you know what? They actually work really well. Like, they are a noisy texture up close, but I think when you actually go a little bit further away, it can really start to pop. So yeah, that's exactly what I've been really trying to do. So in this sort of stage, I tend to mess around a bit more with this and trying to figure things out. But yeah, I'm still learning, but I think it's getting there quite a bit. And then I sort of then carry that on then into sort of the wall as a whole. And as you can start to see, this is really starting to break up nicely from those initial columns we added. And as you can see, we've also started to add in bricks and stuff. So I started mixing in that from that initial palette that I showed as well. I was thinking about ways that, like, and this is sort of the phases where I start to think about ways that I can kind of break up the walls even more to make sure that there's nothing really kind of flat, and sort of add as much depth as possible. And then one of the things that I tend to try and do at this stage is think about what I could add in. And in this case, what I've decided is that I would add in some of the I always forget what is this one, the waxed or exposed cut copper. So using this, I think it blends in really well with both the mud textures but also the brick textures. And I just tried to make a little bit of a shape. Now it is quite symmetrical repeating, I'll admit, but it's just a way to kind of like fill out some of the space, add a bit more depth, and I think this can go a long way. So I definitely recommend experiment with this sort of stuff with it doesn't have to be copper blocks. I'm just using this in not my build. This is what I tend to go towards. I really like the use of copper. Like, copper is easily one of my favorite blocks, especially with all the new variants that they added in recently. I don't know why they didn't do them at the start when they originally added copper. I'm glad they did now. But yeah, generally I like using copper wherever I can. Obviously, it's even easier to get now in survival mode. I mean, you've got obviously all the trial chambers with like pretty much unlimited copper, so go nuts. But yeah. And then, at least in this sort of phase, when I was designing the factory, I then decided that for my little outlet section that I was also going to use the other palette that I showed with the stone-based blocks. I decided to keep it separate so that it was very clear that this was a different section. This is not the main building. This is a little like an extension built on. So I've intentionally used instead the stone, like mixture of stone blocks. And I maybe it is a little bit busy, but I've just got a mix of cobblestone, the stone bricks, and polished andesites, just to kind of mix things up a little bit. But yeah, once I've kind of got together that, then I also think a bit more around the texturing of the roof. And because I decided quite early on in this that I wanted to use more of the tough blocks, I've used quite a blend. And you know, I really do need to think about how I can improve how my like I can blend different blocks together. But in general, I tend to gravitate towards just giving myself a bit of a blend of the blocks I want to use. So I've kept like the arch bands, like obviously the set polished tough blocks, but then for the main roof itself, I've used just the mixture of tough and bricks and the tough bricks. But I think this always looks quite nice in general. But yeah, this is a sort of stage where I really start to go wild a bit with texturing, kind of figure out what does and doesn't work, and kind of add in more defining features, even right down to like obviously in the chimneys as well, like looking about how we can make them stand out a bit more. So like in the chimneys, I wanted to make them pop out from the rest of the structure by using the deep slate blocks. So yeah, I have gone through pretty much most of the different family sets of blocks, but I just wanted to have something that was a different color that would really stand out, but at the same time could still feel connected. So for the chimneys, I went for the deep slate blocks, and then I've kind of broken up a little bit with the use of polished andesite, and then added in the sort of jutting out top section of the funnels at the top there to kind of really bring it to life. So this is the phase where generally I get really excited and I start to go wild with texturing and different details. Like in this design, I decided that I wanted to add in a bit more of a feature on the front. I have no idea really what purpose it should really serve or anything else like that, but it's just an aesthetic detail I figured could fill this space, because when I was coming up with this build, I realized it was going to be quite a big open space that was completely undetailed. It just kind of felt quite flat. So I was kind of thinking about what I could do, and I figured I could make like some sort of like circular like structure with like glass panes that we can kind of see through and let a bit of light in and stuff. And I was glad I did, because I think that actually goes quite a long way. So, but I mean, in this case, I figured that it worked quite well to have something like this just fill the space. So then we kind of got things framed quite nicely, because we have, as I said, the pillars. We have the nice little bit of detailing to kind of connect between them, the lower level, with the little roof ledge that's going through and connecting the two. And now I think we come to probably one of the most fun bits, and that's the final stage that I generally follow in any kind of build, and that's where I really kind of just look at like what details I can add in that can really help bring the build to life. So once you've obviously got your structure together, once you've got your block choices in place, once you've got all the texturing and the kind of the core structure all completed out, it comes to the fun bit where you actually want to figure out what you can actually do to bring it to life. And there are so many little things you can do in the game that can do that. And this is what I generally like to do a lot of. I tend to look at different decorative blocks and different sort of alternative blocks that can be used to really, just say, bring it to life. So I was looking at stuff like the blast furnace, like really kind of coming towards any sort of industrial build like this. I figured like blast furnace and like even things like the grindstone, they don't necessarily make tons of sense, but I think they can work quite well just to kind of, fill these little inlet sections here and just kind of add a bit of energy. I mean, if I could figure out a way of keeping these like maybe like fueled up or something, that would be really epic. But even just in this form, it still looks pretty good. And then obviously I think you can't go wrong with iron bars, at least when they're used sparingly. Like I wouldn't recommend going too overboard because they can get quite noisy. But I think, yeah, iron bars can always go a long way. And of course, then you can hang stuff off them like lanterns. So I've added a few of these here sort of sparingly, but I've added a few around to light up the build a little bit. So at nighttime, it'll look all the better for it. And then obviously you can do stuff like make use of things like the new copper trapdoors. I love it. I said it before, but I really love all these new copper blocks that are added in. Like I really don't know why they didn't add them in before, but I am so grateful that they added them in because they just look amazing and they just tie in so well to all this sort of color palettes that we've got going on here. And even more so as well, I love the new copper bulbs. I love that we can just have them lit up. Don't need to have any sort of lever behind them or anything like that, but you just like trigger them on, leave them on, and then they can go quite nicely behind the trapdoors as well, just to kind of like make it sort of, blend in a little bit more, but adding that subtle lighting. I think that's awesome. But yeah, and I think you can also think about like what you can do to break things up. So obviously we have the roof ledges and stuff like that at the top. So what you can also do is break things up with things like stair blocks underneath. So it makes it feel like the roof's actually a bit supported. So it kind of makes a bit more sense in the real world. So you're not just having some roof that's hanging there. You actually have something that's supporting it physically, and it just, works a little bit nicer that way. And then you can also fill the gaps with stuff like fence gates. I think fence gates can really work quite well to fill little gaps like this, especially if you use like the darker colors. I think they can look quite good. It makes it look quite like almost like a shadow, if you like. You could experiment with any of these. You could even use like full-on fences, but I think the gates just looks better in this sort of context. Obviously you can go crazy with different trapdoors as well. So obviously we've got windows. Like you can't go wrong really with spruce trapdoors underneath your window ledge like that. It just adds a little bit of like depth onto it, and it also breaks things up a little bit and makes it quite clear that this is your windows. Like it wasn't obvious already, but I think that just works quite well together. And what else? Well, the actual the chimneys and the smoke plumes. Now, very recently, until very recently, I tended to avoid a lot more all of the organic smoke plumes and stuff with glass panes because, well, they are quite hard to get right. I'll admit it's not something that comes naturally to me. So this is something that I've definitely had to do in creative to really kind of figure things out. But it can go a long way into making a build feel much more full of energy. Now, I know you could just fill these up with campfires, and sure, they'd light it up, you'd have the smoke plumes, but obviously, it's going to be very limited about how high those smoke plumes actually go, and they're going to be just going like vertically. There's not going to be any spread, there's not going to be any kind of realistic drift in like the imaginary breezes that we have in your worlds. So obviously, that's when I think glass panes really kind of sells itself. So if you're feeling brave and you want to try this out, then this is kind of a really fun detail that you can add into builds. And this is what I've chosen really in this design, where I've kind of experimented out and I've tried to use a mixture of the different color blocks. I've gone like the whites, the light grey, and black stained glass, and also the panes as well, with a smattering of end rods as well, just to kind of light things up. And I've kind of just tried to angle it off ever so slightly. If you look, you can see it's ever so slightly angled to basically show like it's like being carried off in a breeze. And I've tried to line them all up together, and I think that can look really well. So yeah, this is kind of in this sort of final design phases where I really kind of enjoy kind of messing around with this. But yeah, it's not really necessarily the point where I used to be the strongest at, but I've actually really enjoyed delving into a bit more of this. I mean, call it like inspiration from watching some of Scar's content, like seeing his like tree that he made that was on fire. Like that was insane. And I would only like strive to try and make anything even like marginally close to being that good. So, you know, I've really tried to experiment a bit more with organic stuff with glass. So, you know, if you're feeling brave, then have a go. I mean, in the world download that you'll have all this available to you. So if you want to have a look at what I've done a bit more closely, or just kind of experiment a bit more yourselves, then you can kind of go wild and do that. The final bits that I really added in at this point is filling out the other roof section, so that flat one that I showed off before. And this is where I actually tried to be a bit conscious about, you know, making it look a bit weathered, and I've tried to add in a bit of like the mossy cobblestone and stuff like that that can kind of just break up the stone a little bit, so it kind of feels like it, you know, it's been, I don't know, like months or years of rain and like wear and tear, and it's slowly over time just kind of aged, and it's got like moss and lichen and stuff building up. So I think, you know, you can really kind of experiment a little bit, add a smattering of something just to kind of break things up and just kind of add that feel a little bit to it. And then, of course, like I said, when you've got then this flat area, you can really start to fill out with other details that can add just as much depth as if you were doing a full-blown like arch structure. And you know what? And this is something that I was messing around with, which was like a water tower design, and honestly, I love it. I just used a mixture of like the oak logs, I think it was oak logs, and the like barrels. The barrels look really good in this context because you've got those distinct bands that go around them, and some trapdoors, and even some signs here to kind of break things up a little bit, and then of course them resting on some fences. So, you know, you can have stuff like that. I think this makes quite a lot of sense in a sort of a classic industrial building. It might have something like this up there on the roof maybe, and then I've added some sort of air outlets here as well. And this is where you can use the campfires. So if you hide something underneath a block, then you can have the smoke particles come through without actually having to have the campfire on full sight. So I think that can look really good, and again, just add a bit of energy. But I think at this point, this is kind of going into kind of the final bits that I really tackle, in all honesty. So other than, of course, maybe the interior. Now, if you watch any of my survival content, you'll know that I tend to shy away from interiors a bit more. I don't know. I just don't really always have much motivation for doing them. Maybe it's because I tend to focus much more on the exteriors of stuff, and I like being outside in the world. I don't know. I don't have much interest in the interior so much, but I do think maybe in this sort of build that it is a bit more important, because, you know, if you're building this factory in your world and you want to have like arms and stuff in here, then it might be nice just to decorate around it a little bit. And I've kind of done a really basic, just a walkway, just to kind of emphasize this a little bit. So I do one day want to build this design in a survival world at some point. So I was thinking that having a little walkway inside of it could go a long way. And oh my gosh, I love the copper grates so much. I say this about every block now and then. That's all my favorite block of all time. But honestly, I think the copper grate might actually be my favorite block in the game now. It's just, where has this been all my life? It just works so well in the context of an industrial build. Now you can actually have a proper little like industrial walkway. It just looks like something you would find in a factory, because you can have like the iron bars that kind of surround it. You have the copper grates to walk over it. I mean, yeah, it just works really well. So yeah, I kind of added in a little bit of a walkway going all the way around, and then I sort of this outlet section, this extension. At least in my mind, I'm thinking like maybe one day when I do take it into a creative world, I'll eventually think about making like a little bit of an office or something up here for the manager that's sort of monitoring all his workers in the factory and things like that. So, you know, you can kind of use your imagination, really kind of figure things out from there. And that's really all I do in kind of all the stages of building something new. It's just kind of taking it step by step, stage by stage, and kind of seeing like where my mood and inspiration takes me with it. And sometimes it goes really well, and sometimes it goes really wrong, but every now and then it just goes perfectly. And this factory, I think, honestly, is my favorite already. I always enjoy making factories in general, but this is my favorite design, and I had so much fun actually putting this together. I mean, so much fun that I couldn't wait to actually build it on a survival world, so I just really wanted to put this together in a video, hoping that it would be useful to people and provide people a bit of inspiration and motivation, because, you know, I know that a lot of people really quite liked my first video around the earlier factory design I made. I know it wasn't necessarily the best tutorial in the world, and I did have a lot of feedback and comments, and I have taken it on board, and that's why I didn't want to build another tutorial here. For this one, I just kind of wanted to take you into my design process, so you could kind of really see behind the scenes about what goes on in my mind when I'm coming up with a build like this, to hopefully help you really a bit more in your own worlds, and to make sure that you can maybe, you know, just have a bit of inspiration to, or like a starting point, if you like, about what you could kind of do in your own worlds. And I think that is the joy of Minecraft, is that you don't have to start from scratch all the time. You can just take some inspiration from something and use that as your starting point, and kind of letting yourself go nuts with that, really, and just kind of seeing where it goes. Yeah, I'm super happy with the design. I really hope that you found this video interesting and useful. And as I said, there will be a world download in the description down below. But if you found this video useful, then do hit that like and subscribe button. And until next time, I will see you later.